We're here today with author Gillian Gaar. We're talking about her new book, Queen and a Night at the Opera, 50 Years. Gillian, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, sure. I love doing these things.
Well, you've got a new book out here, Queen and a Night at the Opera, 50 Years. Can you tell the listeners a bit about the new book?
Well, this is part of a series of books that this publisher does on, I think they call it the Great Album Series. And I was inspired because a couple years ago, they put out a book on Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. It was 2023 and the 50th anniversary of that album. So right away, I'm thinking, okay, what albums have an anniversary coming up that are important albums? And it didn't take long to land on A Night at the Opera, which is one of my favorite albums. So that made it even better for me. I've worked with this publisher before and I just pitched, hey, what about this album for the Great Album Series? You know, classic, legendary album, still lives on. The band is still touring. We had all the things that have gone on since its release. And thankfully, the editor agreed.
Well, and you really do a deep dive into each track on the album, but you're also really giving insight into, what happened in the studio and on the road and just kind of what was happening with the band around that time in general.
Yeah, I mean, it's meant to focus on the album. So you have a whole chapter on the recording of the album, and then there's a chapter on each side of the album, the songs on each side, because of course that was the days of vinyl. And so you had side one and side two. So then you kind of talk about the songs again in depth, and then the reception that it received and all the awards and acclaim and notices that it got in the wake of that. But I found that looking into the making of the album was the really fascinating part.
And I know this was Queen's fourth album, but I mean, they really had only been making albums for maybe 2 years or so at that time. And I also read it was the most expensive album recorded at that time. I mean, you can tell record companies really gave bands a lot of time and opportunity to find their footing. It's not really like that nowadays.
I know that's kind of sad. I mean, you see if people are given time to develop, then they can turn out some good things. Like Warner Brothers used to be really known for that. There are some other artists stayed on the label for years, and maybe they didn't have any hits. They thought, oh, this is good music. Let's just keep releasing it. So yeah, they had a chance to grow and not only grow as musicians, but learn how to work in the studio, because those are sort of two different things. Queen played live. That's how all bands start out, really, by playing live. But getting in the studio and getting the sound you want out of it, it's another skill that you have to learn. And so really by the time they got to the fourth album, they had more experience, and they were working with a producer, Roy Thomas Baker, who was interested in being as experimental as they were. So they were lucky to be paired with someone like him. And they could really, they really pushed to use the studio to its full advantage, which is one reason why it took so long and ended up costing so much. But, they made their money back.
Well, I will say fans of that mid-'70s era of Queen will love this book, but you also go in depth with the beginning of the band and where they went after Night at the Opera, and there's so many cool photos, and I really like the old merchandise and the posters and stuff in there as well. Very cool stuff.
Oh yeah, I wasn't involved in that part, thankfully, because that's a job. And so I'm glad that there was, a good crew looking into all that stuff. They put out some Queen books before, so I think they knew where to go to find the interesting things. And I think some of these books, a lot of them just have, say, one chapter after the album is released, but I felt I could get away with two, because you have the band up to Freddie's death and then the band after Freddie's death, when, they reunited, for one thing. And you had the whole Wayne's World thing taking off, introducing him to a new generation. That happened after Freddie's death. So there was still more going on afterwards that did involve Queen.
Definitely. Again, Gillian Gaar's with us. We're talking about her new book, Queen and a Night at the Opera, 50 Years. I think one thing I love about Queen, you can't really categorize them. Some people say hard rock or even metal, maybe, and then they've also got folk songs and Wurlitzer pianos and whatever you call Bohemian Rhapsody, I guess. I mean, they kind of threw everything on their albums and they made it work.
Yeah. I mean, I think maybe in the 80s you would say there was more of a standard hard rock kind of sound, but certainly in the 70s there were a lot of musical styles, and certainly that's what you see on A Night at the Opera. And indeed, as you mentioned, that's what you see in Bohemian Rhapsody. I mean, when you first listen to it, you think it's going to be a ballad. But then it goes into opera and then it goes into this hard rock section. And the rest of the album is like that. Yeah, that I guess it showed how competent they were as musicians too, because they could be so versatile and do all these styles. I mean, you had like the folk stuff in 39, Brian May's sci-fi folk, I guess you'd call it, and you have Freddie's vaudeville turns, and then you have Roger Taylor's really heavy "I'm in love with my car," and John Deacon's pop hit "My You're My Best Friend."
And you mentioned it, Wayne's World. I wanted to ask you about that, how important that was for not just the legacy of A Night at the Opera, but Queen in general. I know a lot of kids who kind of looked into Queen a lot more seriously after that movie came out.
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised when I first saw it because, I mean, by this time, came out in '92. So by this time, I thought young metalhead guys are probably not listening to Queen anymore. They wouldn't necessarily have grown up with it the way people born at an earlier era would have. So it was kind of surprising to have that song in there because I thought these guys wouldn't be listening to Queen, they'd be listening to something else. But having said that, I mean, it obviously worked. It became this iconic moment. Especially, I think, because people could also just relate to the setup, even if it wasn't that song. You probably drove around headbanging in your car when you were a teenager yourself. So it brings you back to that time. And I guess, well, I suppose they weren't thinking of it in these terms, but it comes pretty much at the beginning of the movie, you know, in the opening sequence. So the first 10 minutes. So I think that sort of won the audience over, I think. And then everyone's ready to just, they're predisposed to like the rest of the movie because of that.
And I think there's a lot of big personalities in Queen. Where do you think they would have gone had Freddie Mercury not died? Would they have continued to kind of innovate through the 90s, or would they have just maybe played the hits or maybe disbanded altogether? Where do you think they would have went?
Well, that's something. I mean, it would have to be more than him not dying. It would have to be him not having AIDS at all in the first place, really. What if Freddie Mercury had not got sick? I think we have some clues in the last album, Innuendo, where I was a fan of the 70s era Queen and not so much the 80s era Queen because that just seemed too big and bombastic. And maybe I wasn't alone in that because after '82, they never toured the US again with Freddie. And meanwhile, they're filling stadiums in other countries. So I wasn't as keen on those albums released in the '80s. But then I think it was '91, Innuendo came out. And I thought that reminded me a lot of the '70s era. I thought, oh, yeah, this is like old Queen, especially the first number, the opening track, which was even kind of like Bohemian Rhapsody, this epic. And so maybe they would have gone into more of that direction. I think they would have continued to do their own thing. I think we might have seen them doing more solo stuff as well. I mean,
Sure.
Roger was already kind of regularly doing solo stuff. And Brian did a bit of it. And well, John Deacon never seemed that interested. But Freddie was doing solo stuff and side projects too. So I think they probably would have diversified in a lot, both as Queen and then in their own work. You know, maybe finding satisfaction in doing things that they couldn't do with Queen. Like, you know, Freddie went and did more operatic vocals on one of his releases. And he wasn't going to be able to do that with Queen all the time.
Sure. Well, do you think it's helped their legacy to continue on without Freddie, or has it hurt it? I mean, what do you think of Queen now as far as the different iterations we've seen?
Well, I don't like how their music is used in commercials all the time, but they want to keep the music out there. And I think that's a good point. I think I even quoted Roger saying something along those lines, that they do that because they want the music out there and not just on some piece of vinyl that's stuck away and forgotten. And you do have to do something to keep the music out there, to keep people interested. I saw how when Soundgarden broke up in the '90s, it was kind of like, it was almost like they disappeared for a while because no one was really overseeing their catalog at all. And those records were not being reissued or out there. And, you know, they were a hit act. They were a big band, but no one was minding the store, as it were. And then finally in this century, someone had said, you know, we really need to get on top of this, or his music could be forgotten.
Sure.
So it's work to keep the music out there. And obviously, Soundgarden, they started reissuing their albums again, and then that led to them reuniting, which was not the plan at first, but it led to that, and certainly it's helped keep their profile up. And I think Queen was doing the same thing. At first, they seem to be at something of a loss, because how do you go on without Freddie? You can't replace Freddie in that sense. Certainly at the time. So they looked in other things. I mean, they were already reissuing their albums on CD with bonus tracks, already getting into that thing, and they put the musical together, "We Will Rock You," and then when Brian had encountered Paul Rogers at some awards function where they were playing together, they thought, maybe this could work. Enough time had passed to where they felt they could bring in another singer, and Paul worked well for them, but he was a hard rock singer, and he didn't fare as well with the lighter material that they did. And I remember after Adam Lambert joined, this friend of mine was always saying to me, "Oh, you have to see it. It's so amazing. Oh, Adam Lambert's so good, da da da." She kept going on and on about it. And so finally, when I got this book contract, I thought it takes a little while to negotiate stuff, but I thought, if I get this book contract, I'm going to see Queen with Adam Lambert, because I thought it would be good for the book. And indeed, I open up with that, and it helped to be able to see what they were doing now. So they weren't coming to where I live. I had to go to San Francisco, but just down the coast. And yeah, I was really impressed. I thought he was quite good, and I thought, gee, I should check them out earlier, because he can do the camp side, but he obviously is a really good vocalist as well, so he can handle all the other stuff. Sure. And certainly the crowd was into it. They were loving it. When you see these kind of shows now, really, it's it's a greatest hits show, basically, because they don't put out new material, so it is all going to be stuff from the past. But you'll hear your favorite Queen songs again, and Brian and Roger obviously enjoying it. So I think it's a lot of fun, and if they go out again, I recommend it.
Excellent. Well, Gillian, I know this book is just out here. What's next for you? Is there anything else we should maybe keep an eye on?
Well, let's see. The same publisher is putting out a book I did on Tom Petty this fall. They were previously under the titles of, and these are two I did for them, Elton John at 75 and Bruce Springsteen at 75, where you pick 75 key moments in their lives. And the book was originally entitled Tom Petty at 75, but apparently they want to move away from that. So it's got a new title. It's something like Tom Petty, the Man and His Music, but it's the same format, where I went through his whole life and picked 75 key moments. So that was interesting to do. I knew about, obviously who Tom Petty is and was familiar with his work, but I didn't know a lot of the details, like what an Elvis fan he was. So it's always fun to do these and learn things about whoever you're writing about. Even if you know a lot about him, like I know a lot about Queen and have read a lot about him, there were still things I learned. So that's a really fun aspect of doing this.
Awesome. Well, definitely Queen and A Night at the Opera. I love the book, and I know Queen fans will as well. And Gillian, thank you so much for your time. Hopefully we can speak again here when the next one comes out.
Yeah, that would be great.
And again, that was Gillian Gaar, and her new book, Queen and A Night at the Opera, 50 Years, is available now.